So these are all the questions. Now back to you.
Yes.
Because we have the second topic on energy.
Yes. I'll try to be brief, but I'll try to touch on all of these. I think one of the key issues here is for us in the West to realize what is at stake, realize the way Russia views this war and the way we have been. So Ukraine is fighting this war on the tactical and operational side. This is existential for them. They have nowhere to go. Russia views itself as being at war with the West. So the longer we continue to act in a state of denial, and that somehow if we push this off, this will go away, or we can come to some sort of a conclusion, the consequences will be much worse. So from my perspective, the answer to a lot of these questions here is we need to have a very clear resolve that we are now in a position where we can't go back anymore. What has taken place over the last 2.5 years has been the line in the sand. What happens in Ukraine affects and will decide what takes place over the next several years. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not isolated either. It affects what takes place in Syria, in North Africa, in the Middle East, and in China and the Indo-Pacific. So we can't view this as an isolated incident. In the United States, you spoke about the American perspective on things. I think largely Americans are in great support of Ukraine, but some of them have also fallen great prey to the information war that Russia has put out. You spoke about religious freedom. I'm a Christian, so this is an important subject for me. Russia has gone to great lengths to try to convince the world that Ukraine is persecuting Orthodox Christians, when, of course, the reality is currently the leadership in the Russian Orthodox Church is essentially all ex-KGB officers. So why would Ukraine have basically a military operation operating inside their capital? Most Ukrainians identify as Ukrainian Orthodox Christians or as some other variation. There's many shades and colors of that all throughout Ukraine. So this is one more example of the Russian information war. Going back to the main issue, which is realizing what is at stake. Once we come to the realization that we are now at war, we're not actually fighting the Russian army. Ukraine is fighting the Russian army, but Russia is doing everything they can to undermine the allies in Europe as well as the United States. So when we come to grips with that helps us gain a perspective of, okay, how do we give Ukraine what they need, and how do we support Ukraine in the way that they need to have victory? Because that needs to be the objective. The objective cannot be just to put a Band-Aid on this, because it will come back later and be much, much worse next time. So it has to be dealt with. Putin has to be dealt with, Russia has to be dealt with, and China and Iran and everyone else will watch and they will see. This is why this is the test. How is the West, how are the allies going to respond? In regards to what Ukraine needs the tools and they need the permissions to use those tools. That's really it. They've already showed that they can accomplish what needs to be done if they have the permissions and if they have the tools. Kursk, what's taking place in Kursk, Russia right now, is an example of that. Now, Ukraine has limited resources. They have close to 1 million people in their military right now, but it's still not enough. Russia has a 2 to 3 times advantage on them, and they have no issue with killing tens of thousands of their own people. So Ukraine has a limited supply of people, but they're willing to fight. In Kharkiv, you mentioned the Dutch. I believe the defense minister of the Netherlands just said yesterday, the right to self-defense does not stop at 100 kilometers over your border. And I think this is a very important point. I spoke about the KAB glide bombs. A lot of these bombs are launched over Russia. They have a very small signature to them, so you can't shoot them down. So these planes launch the bombs within Russia. They come down. You can't shoot them down because they're too small. To take out Russian airfields, to take out Russian bases, and to take out Russian aircraft before it starts. Russia's goal is to remove Ukraine as an active player on the world stage. We need to take this seriously in that respect. Regarding what you said about equipment, the war is incredibly dynamic. A lot of people say it's World War I, a lot of people say it's the future. It's actually not any of those things. It's a mix. The Ukrainians have been incredibly good at adapting. In some places, they've had to change over to using more drones because they don't have enough tanks. In other places, they can use tanks because they have the right air defense, anti-drone equipment, which can jam drones. So it just depends where you are on the battlefield. But one thing which is definitely true, and I saw this everywhere I went, was there's not enough armored fighting vehicles, there's not enough tanks, there's not enough ammunition, and there's not enough equipment. Why do you need armored fighting vehicles and tanks? That allows you to go on the offensive. If you only have artillery and infantry, you're stuck in the same place and you can only move backwards. So the Russians, again, have a massive store of vehicles and equipment that they can pull on and that they are pulling on. And they have no issues with losing men and equipment. So this is why we're in the position in the East where little by little, Ukraine has been pushed back here and there. They've had a few counteroffensives, but there just hasn't been enough of anything to launch any substantial response. Ukraine and Ukrainians, again, to your question, they have the will. They have the will and they have the heart. Again, they know this is their country, and they also know that the peace agreements and the treaty agreements never work because the West holds to them, but the Russians never do. The Russians always wait until somebody is looking away, and then they take their opportunity. This doesn't just happen in Ukraine. Again, it happens in Syria. It happens in the Middle East. It happens in North Africa. On the ground, every time, I always ask this because I always want to know if it changes, because people get tired. They get weary of war. But even though you see wrinkles and bags under people's eyes and they're worn out and they're frustrated at the lack of clarity here and the disconnect between worlds, there's still total resolve that for them, this is until victory and this is to the end. The one phrase you can't say in Ukraine without getting frustration is as long as it takes. They hate this. Nobody knows what as long as it takes means. We need until victory. Once we decide, okay, this is a war, we're fighting for victory, then you're able to mobilize economies and you're able to create a vision to move forward. But if nobody has agreed that this is a real issue and half of the group is hoping that it'll go away and the other half are sort of half-heartedly putting it in, that's a real issue. So how do we solve all this? I think a big part of it is individual leadership from representatives of each country saying on their own behalf, we need to take this incredibly seriously. We need to understand that the longer we push this off, when it comes to us, and it will come to us, it will be much worse. So the safest and the most humanitarian thing to do is fight with all our might and with all our will as hard as we can right now and get this to end as soon as possible, completely, in a way that restores Ukraine's territorial integrity and their statehood and personhood. If you go throughout Ukraine, if the Russians have taken a city, if you have a trizub, which is the coat of arms of Ukraine, if you have a trizub tattoo on your arm, you're probably going to get killed. There are parts by the Russians. If there are parts of the east of Ukraine that are occupied and you speak Ukrainian, if you continue to speak Ukrainian, you'll be tortured or you'll be killed. The Russians have absolutely no leash. They have no qualms with getting away with whatever they can get away with. As diplomatic and as slippery as Putin is, we have to take seriously what has taken place over the last 2.5 years. There has been torture, there has been terror, there has been rape on a systemic level, and it's done the same way everywhere. It's not a one-off. The Russian military is completely out of control. So Ukraine needs the weapons, and they need the ability to defend themselves and to strike back in Kharkiv, in Odessa, in Pokrovsk, in Kiev, and Lviv.